You might want to shut those machines down." The guy didn't yell it. Didn't have to. He just stood there at the edge of the driveway with his phone already recording, wearing that kind of smile that isn't really a smile at all. The kind that says he's not asking, he's informing you. I remember looking at him, then at my crew, then back at him again, and thinking, well, this day just got a whole lot longer. My name's Jake Turner. I run a small landscaping company outside Greenville, South Carolina. Nothing fancy. Mostly mowing lawns, hauling junk, cleaning up properties people have fallen behind on. The kind of work nobody notices until it stops getting done. That morning was supposed to be simple. A local church volunteer had called me about an elderly woman named Clara Whitmore, 76 years old, widow, lived alone in a little white house she'd owned since the early 80s. According to him, she was in trouble with the city. When I pulled up that morning, I understood why. The yard looked like nature had one. Grass almost waist-high in some places. Weeds crawling over flower beds. Shrubs growing wild against the windows. You couldn't even see most of the front walkway. Orange code violation notices were taped to her front door like warning labels. The kind of notices that start with fines and end with liens. When Clara opened the door, she looked embarrassed before she even said hello. "I know how bad it looks," she said quietly. I told her not to worry. Honestly, I've had that same conversation hundreds of times. Life catches people. A surgery, a death, a fixed income, a bad year that turns into 3 bad years. Suddenly the yard gets away from you. It gets away from your neighbors. Then it gets away from the city. And before you know it, you're drowning in something as simple as grass. She gave me a small smile and nodded. But there was something else there too. Fear. At the time, I thought she was worried about the fines. Turns out I was wrong. About 20 minutes after we started working, that's when he showed up, the neighbor. His name was Victor Kane. Nice house. Perfect driveway. Perfect fence. Perfect truck. The kind of guy who looked like he ironed his blue jeans. He walked straight toward us with his phone raised. "You boys need to stop," he said. Luis, one of my crew members, slowed his mower and looked over at me. I didn't answer right away. Victor pointed toward the property line. "You're interfering with an active dispute." That caught my attention. "What dispute?" I asked. His smile widened slightly. "The kind that isn't your business." Now, I've met difficult neighbors before. People who complain about leaves. People who call city inspectors because a trash can sat outside too long. But Victor felt different. He wasn't emotional. He was calculated. Like he'd rehearsed this conversation before he ever walked outside. I told him Clara had asked us to clean the property. He shook his head. "No," he said. "She's being manipulated." Then he lowered his voice. "You really don't want to involve yourself in this situation." That landed differently. Not because it scared me, because it sounded practiced, like he'd used that line before. Behind him, I noticed movement inside Clara's house. She was standing behind the screen door watching, not saying anything, not stepping outside, just watching. And there was something about the way she looked at him that bothered me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was resignation. Like she'd seen this movie before. Like she already knew how it ended. And for the first time that morning, I started wondering if the overgrown yard wasn't the real story here. Because sometimes the weeds aren't the problem. Sometimes they're just a symptom. And standing there between Clara's neglected property and Victor Kane's perfectly maintained lawn, I had a feeling I was about to find out exactly what had been growing in this neighborhood for a very long time. I didn't know it yet, but Victor Kane had spent nearly 7 years turning one old woman's life into a slow-motion surrender. You don't usually discover something like that all at once. It comes out piece by piece. A comment here, a look there, a neighbor finally deciding they've stayed quiet long enough. At first, I just told my crew to keep working. Luis fired the mower back up. The engine broke the silence, and for a second Victor looked genuinely surprised. Not angry, surprised. Like people usually folded before this part. "You're making a mistake," he said. I shrugged. "Maybe." Then I turned back to work. After that, we went to work like we were possessed. Not angry, not reckless, just focused. The kind of focus that comes when everybody in the room suddenly understands what they're actually doing. Luis and Eric attacked the front lawn. Walter somehow appointed himself unofficial supervisor from his folding chair. Denise grabbed a rake from her garage and joined in without asking permission from anyone. And Victor? Victor kept circling, still recording, still talking, still trying to regain control of something that was slipping through his fingers. But the weird thing about power is that once people stop believing in it, it starts shrinking fast. About an hour later, the transformation was impossible to ignore. The front walkway appeared first, then the flower beds, then the porch steps, then entire sections of the house nobody could even see that morning. It felt less like cleaning and more like uncovering something buried. The biggest battle was along the rear fence. That's where the vines had built their kingdom. Thick knots of roots twisted through everything. Old wood, shrubs, garden borders. At one point, I cut through a section so large it dropped to the ground with a thud loud enough to make everyone look over. When it fell, sunlight hit part of the fence that probably hadn't seen daylight in years. And that's when we found it. The evidence. Not legal evidence. Real evidence. The kind your eyes can't argue with. The main root system, buried entirely on Victor's side of the fence. Massive, healthy, untouched, feeding nearly every vine that had invaded Clara's property. Denise saw it first, then Walter, then everybody else. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. Victor knew exactly what they were looking at. His face turned red. Not bright red. The dangerous kind. The kind people get when embarrassment starts mixing with anger. That's irrelevant, he snapped. Walter nearly fell out of his chair laughing. I don't think that word means what you think it means. Even my crew lost it. Victor looked around expecting support. Nobody gave him any. Not one person. Because the story he'd spent years telling suddenly had a giant root system attached to it. Literally. The next hour flew by. One section after another disappeared. Grass became lawn. Chaos became order. The property slowly started looking like a home again. Then finally we reached the last patch. The final stretch along the back corner. The worst area on the entire lot. I remember grabbing the loppers and cutting through the final cluster of vines while everyone watched. One pull. Nothing. Second pull. Still stuck. Third pull. The entire section ripped free. Roots. Branches. Dead growth. Years of buildup. All of it came crashing down at once. And then, silence. Real silence. No mauers. No trimes. No arguments. Just a clean yard. I stood there breathing hard and looked around. Honestly, it didn't even feel like the same property. The grass was cut in neat lines. The fence was visible. The flower beds were back. The walkway stretched cleanly from the porch to the sidewalk. Sunlight reached places that had been hidden all morning. Maybe all year. Maybe longer. Nobody spoke. Then we heard the screen door. Clara. She stepped onto the porch. Walked down every step. Slowly. Carefully. But without stopping. The whole neighborhood watched. She reached the bottom and stood there looking across her yard. Not saying a word. Just looking. Her eyes moved from one side to the other. Taking everything in. Remembering. Finally she smiled. A real smile. The kind that sneaks up on someone. And then she said something so quietly most people almost missed it. I forgot it looked like this. Mun, that hit harder than I expected. Because losing something slowly is strange. You don't always notice when it disappears. Sometimes it fades a little at a time, until one day you've forgotten what normal even looked like. Luis broke the silence. Well, he said, wiping sweat from his forehead, I think we still got it. Everybody laughed. Even Clara. And hearing that laugh felt like hearing someone open a window after a long winter. Then I noticed movement near the driveway. Victor, still standing there. Arms crossed. Phone lowered now. No speeches left. No audience left. Just him. Watching. I walked over near the fence. Not close enough to start a confrontation. Just close enough to acknowledge him. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he spoke. This won't last. His voice sounded different now. Smaller somehow. I glanced back toward Clara. Toward Denise. Toward Walter. Toward my crew loading equipment into the truck. Then back at him. Maybe, I said. He frowned. You think this changes anything? I looked around again. The clean yard. The neighbors talking. Clara standing in sunlight. Smiling. And honestly, I couldn't help it. I smiled too. Yeah, I said. I think it changes more than you realize. For a second, he looked like he wanted to argue. Wanted one final battle. One final chance to be right. But there wasn't anything left to fight. The yard spoke for itself. The neighbors spoke for themselves. Even Clara had spoken for herself. So instead, Victor turned around and walked back toward his house. No dramatic exit. No final threat. Just a man realizing that the story he'd controlled for years wasn't his anymore. We packed up shortly after. As we climbed into the truck, Clara walked over. I don't have much, she said quietly, but I'd like to pay you something extra. I shook my head. No, ma'am. She looked confused. Why not? I glanced back at the yard, then at her, because I think we already got paid. For a second, she didn't understand. Then she followed my eyes, and she smiled again. This time she understood exactly what I meant. As we drove away, I looked in the side mirror one last time. Clara wasn't standing on the porch. She wasn't hiding behind the screen door. She wasn't watching from a window. She was standing right in the middle of her yard. Her yard. Sunlight on her face. Looking around like she was seeing home for the first time in years. And honestly, that's the part I've never forgotten. Not Victor. Not the argument. Not the confrontation. That image. Because it got me thinking, how many people slowly get pushed into the background of their own lives? Not through violence. Not through some giant dramatic event. But through steady pressure. Little by little. Year after year. Until they start believing they don't belong where they've always belonged. And maybe that's why this story still sticks with me. Because all we really did was cut grass. At least that's what it looked like. But maybe sometimes showing up for somebody is bigger than the job itself. Maybe sometimes the smallest acts create the biggest changes. Now here's the question I want to leave with you. If you had been standing there that day, would you have shut the machines down and walked away the moment Victor demanded it? Or would you have stayed and finished the job? Was Victor protecting his rights, or was he abusing them? Was what we did the right thing, or did we cross a line? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I genuinely want to know where you stand on this one. And if you've ever seen someone get pushed around by a person who thought nobody would step in, share this story with them. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for more real stories about neighbors, communities, conflict, and the moments that remind us what people are capable of when they finally decide to show up for each other. That seemed to bother him more than if I'd argued. The thing about guys like Victor is they feed off conflict. They want the debate. They want the reaction. They want you playing on the field they've already prepared. But when you don't engage, suddenly they're the only one talking. And that gets uncomfortable. For the next 15 minutes, he followed us around recording everything. Every mower pass. Every weed we pulled, every pile of brush we loaded, narrating into his phone like he was filming a documentary. Unauthorized activity, potential property violations, evidence, lots of words that sounded important, not many that actually meant anything. Then something happened that changed everything. A woman from across the street walked over. Scrubs, coffee cup, looked exhausted, probably just got off a 12-hour shift. She stopped beside me and watched for a moment. Then she said something I'll never forget. About time somebody helped Clara. Victor immediately turned toward her. This doesn't concern you, Denise. She laughed. Not nervous laughter. The kind that says she's been waiting years to say something. Actually, she said, it concerns everybody. That got my attention. Victor's too. For the first time, his smile disappeared. Just for a second. Then it came back. Tighter than before. Stay out of it. Denise crossed her arms. No, simple as that. No speech, no drama, just one word. No. And suddenly Victor looked a lot less comfortable. She pointed toward the side fence separating his property from Clara's. Tell him about the vines. Victor's face changed immediately. Tiny change, but enough. What vines? I asked. Denise looked at me. The ones growing from his yard. Now, we'd already noticed vegetation spilling across the property line. What we hadn't realized was how much of it originated next door. I walked toward the fence. The closer I got, the more obvious it became. Massive invasive vines had completely consumed entire sections of the boundary. They wrapped around fence posts, covered flower beds, choked small bushes. Some were thicker than my wrist, and every single one traced back toward Victor's side. Untouched, untrimmed, allowed to spread for years. That wasn't neglect. Neglect happens accidentally. This felt intentional. Victor followed behind me. You touch anything over there, and we're going to have a problem. I looked at the vines, then at him, then back at the vines. Funny thing, I said. They seemed pretty interested in her property. He didn't answer, because there wasn't a good answer. That's when another neighbor appeared, then another, and another. Apparently people had been watching from windows all morning. Now, they were starting to come outside. An older man named Walter walked over carrying a folding chair. Actually brought a chair, set it down on the sidewalk, sat down, and said, I've waited 6 years for this conversation. The whole crew started laughing. Even I couldn't help it. Victor definitely didn't appreciate the joke. What exactly is that supposed to mean? He snapped. Walter leaned back. Means everybody knows what you've been doing. The atmosphere changed immediately. You could feel it, like pressure finally escaping from a sealed container. People started talking, not all at once, one after another. Stories, incidents, arguments, complaints, patterns. Apparently Victor had spent years filing reports on Clara, calling inspectors, documenting violations, reporting overgrowth, reporting debris, reporting maintenance issues. The problem was, half the overgrowth had originated from his property. The same vines, the same invasive plants, the same sections he'd refused to maintain. According to Walter, multiple neighbors had complained about it over the years. Victor ignored every one of them, but somehow always found time to report Clara. The more I listened, the uglier it became. This wasn't about property values. It wasn't about neighborhood standards. It wasn't about the law. It was about control. Victor liked being the person everyone had to deal with, the unofficial authority, the neighborhood enforcer. And Clara was the easiest target because she lived alone. No husband, no children nearby, no one showing up to push back. At least not until today. Around that time, I heard a door open behind me. Everyone turned. Clara. She was stepping outside, slowly, carefully, one hand on the railing. The crowd immediately quieted. Victor looked irritated. The neighbors looked concerned. And Clara looked nervous. But she didn't go back inside. She walked all the way onto the porch. The farthest, Denise later told me, anyone had seen her come outside in months. Victor pointed toward us. You never authorized this. The statement sounded confident, until Clara answered. Yes, I did. Dead silence. Victor blinked, then laughed. A short, cold laugh. No, you didn't. I asked for help. You don't understand the consequences. That's when something changed in Clara. It wasn't dramatic. No big movie speech. No sudden transformation. Just a tired old woman reaching a point where she'd had enough. She looked directly at him, for what felt like the first time all day, and said quietly, Victor, everything doesn't belong to you. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even my crew stopped working, because you could feel the weight behind those words. Years of frustration, years of pressure, years of being made to feel small. Victor opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, searching for a response. But before he could find one, Walter called out from his folding chair. Well, that's probably the most honest thing anybody's said all year. The entire sidewalk erupted in laughter. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Victor Kane looked completely alone. What happened next was the moment I realized this had stopped being a landscaping job. Because while everyone else was watching Victor, I was looking at Clara. And I noticed something. For the first time all day, she wasn't staring at the ground. She wasn't looking at her front door. She wasn't looking for a way out. She was looking at her own yard, like she was remembering it, like she was seeing the possibility that it could belong to her again. And right then, standing in the middle of all that overgrown grass and tangled vines, I made a decision. We weren't leaving until every inch of that property was finished. No matter how uncomfortable it got. No matter how many threats Victor made. No matter who he called. Because some jobs are about landscaping. And some jobs become about something else entirely.